Thanks everyone for joining. I will give a quick introduction to myself. So by the way, if you have any questions throughout the tour, you just go ahead and put it in the chat and we can always refer to it. So my name is Nicole Schoeni. I'm the founder of Schoeni Projects. In my past life, you could say I ran Schoeni Art Gallery for 10 years, which I inherited from my late father, Manfred Schoeni, in 2004. We founded Schoeni Projects in 2020, and our inaugural project was an exhibition called Disconnect, which you can actually see on your screen now. So Disconnect was an artist takeover that responded to the pandemic. The artworks responded to the pandemic, the way in which we did the exhibition itself as well. And, you know, because of course people couldn't travel and we wanted to reach a wider audience, we created this virtual exhibition on Matterport. So it really began our journey into experimenting with virtual spaces in relation to art and its advantages and disadvantages. So SPXR, which we'll visit in a minute, is really an evolution of that journey. And in fact, the house of the virtual space is based on the same Victorian house, which you're looking at now. So I'm quite excited about the possibilities and opportunities that Web3 presents in creative, innovative and immersive art experiences as a means to engage with a wider audience. And I don't think many of you joined yesterday, but we had a great talk with Sylvain Levy, who's the DSL collection, and Howard Gillian from Digital Art Fair, and also Jackie Tsai. So we had a great discussion about metaverse and the pros and cons, and because I always joke that I'm quite tech illiterate and still a steep learning curve. So was building SPXR. So the idea of SPXR really came from wanting to present our family collection. You know, Schoeni Projects is built upon the foundations of my late father's accomplishments, and it felt appropriate to launch SPXR with his collection, as well as an archive of Schoeni Art Gallery. So my late father, he really is considered a pioneer in Chinese contemporary art, but I feel like he's underrepresented in the history of Chinese contemporary art. And, you know, he played quite a large role as a commercial gallerist, but really he was also a patron and a collector. So why don't we jump to SPXR? So to show Dad's collection, I approached Dr. Martha Liew, who's here and will give us a guided tour. I approached her for several reasons. She specialized in Chinese contemporary art, as well as a hybrid between art and architecture. She had actually received her curatorial training with Schoeni Art Gallery in 1993 to 1996. And she has experience in curating NFT exhibition, which she did in Hong Kong, which was called Wave Space Art. So the reason I also approached Martha is she's an academic, and I wanted to really give Dad's collection and his contribution a rubber stamp, if you like, from an academic. So later on in the year, she will release an academic essay about the collection. So the process really was, we shared with her my father's collection of Chinese contemporary art. So it ranges from, I think, the late 80s up to 2004 when he passed away. You know, the experience for me was quite cathartic, and we reached out to a lot of the artists to sort of, I guess, almost remind ourselves what was their impressions about him. And it was all really quite heartwarming and funny as well. You know, they all referred to him as a movie star, didn't they, Martha? But we will talk more about the stories as we go along. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Martha, if you'd like to begin. And we can begin the walk around.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Nicole, for the introduction and also for explaining the motivation behind these exhibitions. I'm very honored to be appointed by the Schoeni family to undertake these meaningful projects, as it is not only the opportunity for me to factually to document the Manfred Schoeni's journey, but I think it's also important to acknowledge his contribution to the development of Chinese contemporary art. As far as I'm aware, and through my academic background, his effort in this field really has not been fully acknowledged in existing literature. So I feel incredibly very honored and excited about curating this exhibition in this metaverse space. When I first started this project, I did recognize that at the very early stage, the collection really should not be defined by convention. As the collector, he was known for his risk-taking, challenging expectation, and established practices. In my opinion, I think it is important to showcase a full spectrum of his collection and to see this exhibition as part of his art journey. This onset not only highlights some of the most recognizable works, but other hidden works as well, such as some of the lesser known works and also some of the less commercially driven works. At first, I thought it was pretty challenging for me to identify and make sense of his divergent and eccentric collections. But with my good understanding of personality and also his way of doing things, which pretty unconventional in my opinions, it's really quickly become very clear to me that the exhibition really cannot be curated in a chronological order. So in order to fully engage with the audience, I actually developed 8 different themes that mirror his art journey. And this guiding principle is obviously, I do believe is an effective way and a meaningful way to reconcile some of the works that may appear at first a little bit alternative in the collection. Before we start looking at each sub-theme, I would really like to give an overview of the structure of this guided tour. I will first present the early years journey to the east on the ground floor, and then we will move on to the first, second, and third floors, and we will end the tour at the basement. And Nicole will also be joining me in some part of the exhibitions because we believe that she definitely can tell some wonderful stories about some of the work in the collection, and I'm quite sure that all of you will find it very entertaining. So let's begin with the first floor, the early years journey to the east on the ground floor. That's where we are at the moment. I think it's very interesting to see this collection. Probably a little bit divergent. If you look at it, even if you look at the themes and the subject matter and all of that. In fact, the collection comprised of some of the early works by some of the masters. I just have to make sure that I say it correctly.
I need to correct myself because I said from 1980s, but I think one of the artworks was actually from 1960. So
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's right. The collection actually comprised of works from the 1960 up to 1994, including some of the defining works by early masters such as Yan Wei Liang, who's regarded as one of the father of Chinese oil painting and also an important educator of his time. And then we've also got Jackson Yu. If you can,
he was in the hallway.
Turn it around. Yeah, in the hallway. So you can see his work. He's actually a Chinese ink painter, and he's known to be the father of modern ink painting in Hong Kong. It's called a new ink art movement actually in Hong Kong. So he's considered one of the pioneers. And you can see it's almost close to abstraction if you look at his work. But you can also see the calligraphic quality, the brushstroke and everything. It's still very much traditional. At that time when he was exhibiting at the gallery, I remember he was already in his 80s. And I remember we felt incredibly excited having him there because it was unusual for your dad actually showcasing ink painting, to be quite honest. And at that time,
really canvas, weren't they?
Yeah. Because he's known to be like collecting oil painting, so for him actually showcasing Jackson Yu, it's very unusual. And I think I should emphasize that at that time, not just him, but there's another artist, Zheng Douchai. the King of Kowloons, who's also known for his calligraphic works, but he's different. He's not academic. He's not coming from art school. He's actually, how can I put it? He was mentally a little bit.
He was a renegade.
Yeah.
Right? King of Kowloon's known for his street art, wasn't he?
Yeah, correct.
And
so he's like the father of graffiti art in Hong Kong, pretty much. So you got these two very unusual characters there. And also we've got Zhu Ying, also on the ground floor, the Buddha's Gunying, is it right? And that's also known for the ink wash painting. Again, very unusual for your dad to collect this kind of work, this kind of medium. Okay, so you can see this is sort of like a very kind of a mix of different styles and genres of painting. But if we move to Charlie, which is the next room on your right, Angel. I thought, so you can see this is like he is I remember this this collection of painting, which was very unusual at the time in the early 90s, because people were just at the time a lot of artists moving. Obviously, it was the open door policy just introduced, and also there was realism was still very much in fashion at that time. So when I look at this work, it was very unusual because it's very in a way it's very surrealist, and very, in a way it's got a lot of abstract elements to it, but also his emphasis on concepts in terms of he uses his imaginations sort of like a basis of his works. And he also used a lot of symbolism as well, such as horses, because he was born in the year of a horse, and also bird, which represent freedom, and musician, because he had been a musician himself. So it was very, when I look at this work, and also when we did the book for him, and I remember looking at the cover of the book, and again, it was very unusual, a little bit eccentric, I have to say, because I remember it was the artist, it was a portrait of the artist himself.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah,
Covered with
yarn.
Yarn.
Yeah, that's right, all over him. It looked pretty crazy at the time and very unusual. So that's my memory of him. Yeah, so this is the ground floor. So you can see it's very different in terms of styles, and also this red one, which is it is an ink painting as well. Yeah, so your dad was definitely experimenting, different types of art, or different genres, different medium, and but yeah, so and this is, it again, it's a very abstract work when you look at it, and unusual for at the time, and
I think also for his collection, because as we go through the rooms, you'll see that a lot of the artworks are like Wang Yiguang there and Beng Gangxian, very figurative.
Yeah, correct. And then the landscape as well. And you can see, again, landscape is not what your dad usually collects. These two, I'm not so familiar with this particular one. I think this is a very old school one, but the one on the left, Hong Ling, I remember we did a one-man show for him as well. It's called Symphony of Landscapes. So so he was trying to translate sort of almost like a Chinese ink painting using oil as his medium instead of ink painting. Again, like it really demonstrated how your dad at the time trying to collect works that are pretty unusual at the time. Like it's not considering at the time when a lot of painters still remain very traditional and conventional. So when you have someone like Charlie and Hong Ling, it really highlight that aspect of your dad. Innovative. Okay, so should we move on to the next floor? One floor.
I think it's worth also noting that a lot of the artworks Dad collected were artists that he had represented through the gallery at some point. So these are all artists that he really believed in, and promoted through the gallery to the sort of international platform.
That's right. Yes. So we're moving on to the first floor. It's the sub-theme. It's called Everyday Life Under the Reform. So when I start sort of conceptualizing this particular theme, and I was kind of thinking at the time, what about the 90s? The 90s at the time was a really important year for China. It was actually, it was experiencing a lot of, even though it was politically, it was stable, but because economically, China was introducing all these different economic policies. So you could imagine people living really, you know, in a very humble existence, and suddenly, you know, open door policy, and they have all these new opportunities. And can you imagine artists trying to adapt this new way of life? And a lot of them actually depicting those, you know, reality of,
I think that painting by Yang Jin-sung is a great example.
Yeah.
The one by a fireplace on the right.
Yep. Yeah.
It's, you know, as like you were saying, Martha, as you know, the economy started to open up, I think materialism and consumerism became part of daily life. Mm-hmm. And in some ways it's like overwhelming. And you know, like Yang Jin-sung, how he presents here, it's just a room full of materialistic objects.
Yes.
And it's quite sweet. It's actually a portrait of him and his wife. So I really love this painting. And then if you move over to Liu Xiaodong,
yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, we actually reached out to some of the artists and asked them for impressions about my dad, but as well as about the artworks. So I actually pulled out a quote, if you don't mind if I read it.
Yeah,
from
sure.
Liu Xiaodong. Yeah. So this is actually a self-portrait, which he painted. Ooh, I can't remember
92,
when he painted.
maybe. I think he painted 92.
Check. Yeah.
90. Oh, 94.
93. Yep. So he goes, I cherish this artwork very much because it is a self-portrait I painted in the early days. I painted myself in front of a big mirror of a big wardrobe at my rural home. I was born a peasant and studied in Beijing, peasant meaning farmer, and then continued my creativity as an artist, but also continued my life as a farmer. I tried my best to face artistic creation as sincerely as possible and portray myself honestly and explain myself to the world of art. So this portrait I like a lot. It has a certain breakthrough for me in terms of color and psychological depiction. So actually, we also have photos of the artworks in the gallery back then. But I sort of loved, you know, hearing directly from the artist what this artwork meant to him, and it was very early in his career. Of course, yes. Now he's one of the, I would say, big names in Chinese contemporary art. Sorry, Martha, if you want to continue.
No, I was going to say this particular work is interesting because, you know, I put it on my Instagram, and I've got so many people actually responded very positively to this work. So for some reason, you know, I don't know what it is, but it seems to be very appeal to the you know, the public, and maybe it's because it contrasts like the modesty of the artists, and you know, at that time in the backdrop of the, you know, economic transformation. He depicted quite well, you know, how he felt, and the fact that a lot of artists, if you could recall, at that time, probably first generation after the Cultural Revolution as well. So a lot of them have, a lot of them was used to, you know, work 2 different jobs. Like, okay, you know, they have a day job, and then also have, you know, then they paint at night.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a career.
Yeah, exactly, and it's almost like a hobby, but also at the same time, you can, you know, some of them actually were sent to some sort of a labor camp as well. So they have that kind of experience, you know, which we could not imagine today. So it is worth noting they do actually have some sort of a double identity, you know what I mean? As an artist and also as a everyday guy, you know, person living under the, you know, socialist regime. Okay, do you want to talk about this particular work, Nicole? Because
Chen Ke, I can talk about Chen Ke.
Yep.
So I think this is an example of sort of Dad's support for artists. This is an artist, Chinese artist called Chen Ke. Her style now is quite different, although it still has an animated sort of style. And this is actually her graduation piece. So Dad would frequently go to, you know, I think it's worth noting at this point, actually, I think pretty much almost all the artists in this exhibition has had some sort of academic background of some sort, as in they were educated in art, right? They all they went to the academies.
That's
so
correct.
Dad would often go to the academies and the graduation exhibitions and sort of support these artists. You know, they just graduated and they needed financial support. So this one he collected when she graduated from the Sichuan Academy of Art. And I just love it because it really is an example of how, you know, he was a gallerist, but he also supported young artists.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the Xiaxing?
Yeah, sure. If you could move to the Xiaxing painting. I think he's one of my favorite artists. I usually like very avant-garde and conceptual. I love the fact that how he incorporate Chinese element and also Western techniques into his painting. But you can really see how he actually depict some of the Chinese, you know, element. For example, you know, everyday life, things that we, you know, Chinese people would do. Where I was pretty much raised in, you know, in the West. So when I look at that, I can see the difference. It's quite clear to me. For example, you know, how we in the West, we definitely do not hold a dog like that. I mean,
or a child.
Yeah, or the child. This is not something that we do in the West. But in China, it's obviously very common. And same with the one next to it, which is picking the ears. Something that we don't do in the West. So when I look at these Xiaxing's painting, is some sort of you know, you can see the it's very erotic and at the same time very humorous, and but also very realistic, you know, socially very realistic to me. And then he uses very his painting technique is really refined, very meticulous. You can call them, it's almost like Renaissance painting in a way, very classical, beautifully composition, and at the same time he put some Chinese writing on it, which is, you know, mimicking the calligraphy style. And you know, I love those combinations. You know, it's really the painting, you know, you look at it, you immediately know this is Xiaxing, this is his identity, this is his signature. Absolutely love it. And he
sort of tongue-in-cheek humor, isn't it?
Yes, sorry.
There's a tongue-in-cheek humor to his artworks, and
yes,
sort of
correct. Yeah,
something quite sensual about it. So he was actually part of the China Realism group, which consisted of all the realism masters, and you'll see more of their works upstairs in a different room. But Xiaxing really stood out because he was a rebel. He's very much a rebel in that group. You know, he has the technique and the skill for the realism, but the stories which he depicted would have been considered very naughty.
Very naughty, definitely naughty, and really challenging. You know, the convention, because very much like your dad, actually. You know, you know, he doesn't just do pretty pictures. He does. You know, he does. He basically rocked the boat, basically. So if you want to describe it.
And we'll see one of his other paintings. He actually painted a portrait of Dad, which I'll talk about later. Can we quickly pop into the library, please, Angel?
Yes.
So I'll explain a little bit about the library as well. This is really quite an ambitious task. I laugh because I set for me and my team. So we had 20 years of gallery history. Throughout that time, we had 180 exhibitions and we published 80 catalogs. So as part of this program, we're actually building an archive about the gallery and the exhibitions. It's a year-long project, but it's really for a tool for education and for research. And I think I'm hoping it will demonstrate the importance of the gallery in promoting and educating the public about Chinese contemporary art. So the archive is digitally or virtual reality represented in the library, and you can click on the books. Do you mind to click on maybe the Liu Dahong? The Liu Dahong is quite a great example. Liu Dahong was actually the first exhibition we ever held, which was in 1992 when we didn't have a gallery at the time. So we held it at China Club. So each exhibition, you can see we have the press release. If you scroll down, we've also got selected artworks, and then we scanned and digitized as well each publication, as you can see here. So, this is really, I think, hopefully a very good resource for students as well, or, academics doing research. And then one of my personal favorites is the photo album. It's photos of the exhibition or the opening. And they're always quite fun because, like, this one is, the fashion style in the early 1990s.
Yeah.
And it sort of gives you a better insight into, what the gallery had done. And there's Liu Dahong at the exhibition. And then we also included additional material. So any material we found, like invitation openings, press clippings, or sometimes even handwritten notes by Dad, we would have scanned them and put it up on this website.
Yeah.
So it is a year-long project, and it's still work in progress.
Yeah, can I just sort of emphasize that the publication that your dad produced at the time, he would always commission very well-known academic scholars to write some of the articles. So Liu Dahong is one of them. I remember, I think Jeremy Barmay was in there. He was the expert in China, contemporary China at the Australian National University, but also the history of oil painting, which we have, several really famous critics contributing to the publication, and basically covering the development of Chinese oil painting from I think 17th century, 17th or 18th century by Cameron. What's his name? I forgot his name. Cameron and Nigel Cameron, I think. And then Nigel Cameron. That's right. And then we've got James Cahill, and then we've got Van Dai Yan, the curator, curator of Shanghai Museum, Yan Xiangqi, all these really known academics. So
I think this was really first of its kind, right, at the time, in terms of a history book about Chinese contemporary art.
So it is one of the very few one. So that's one of them, and it is actually dedicated to Chinese oil painting. So your dad was very, very clear about that. It's not like other books that produced, for example, by Johnson, which is covering avant-garde arts, which sometimes encompassing a huge, a variety of mediums. Your dad was actually specifically look for oil painting for this particular publication. So that was, I think this is one of the first book he did, like in terms of looking at the history of it, of oil painting. And all the other books are more or less on particular artists, or so it was unusual.
A lot of solo exhibitions, So I encourage the participants later, we'll navigate through, and then you can go and visit yourself. I'm a bit conscious about time, so should we pop upstairs?
Yep. So the next level, let's go to the next one, constructing social reality. So this is one of my favorite themes, partly because I think that period, 1990, was incredibly rich and very interesting. And when I curated this theme, I could see that it could split into two groups. The first one I call it social commentary, which is concerning with probably with the internalization, like how artists feel at the time. So if we go into this room on the left, so you can see. Yes, so it's sort of like depiction of everyday life, how people artists felt at the time, trying to adjusting to this new life. You can see how laborers used to work, and and their way of life. It's very I wouldn't say the word confronting, but it is very informative for me to trying to understand how they used to live, and some of the challenges they face at the time. Blood donors, for example. I don't want to go into too much details on it, but can you imagine people so poor at that time, and some of them actually would donate blood to get in order to survive. And Jin Fanzi is very much he been through all those very rough time at the in the 90s. So I think he really synthesized it's sort of this facet of life in China at the time. So his work tend to be, at that period very serious. Don't you agree, Nicole? Yeah, quite serious. And the mask series as well, very much how he, thinking about living in this world, and then he has to put a mask on, and that stays everything pretty much. Yeah, exactly. So this is one. Group, and then we go to the next room.
Hold on, before we go to the next room, sorry.
Yep.
Sorry,
Angel. That's okay. You go.
Backtrack. I want to show Shenhua Hot Pot, the one on the left.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah, I just love this work because it's really another example, again, of Dad collecting a graduation piece. And then it happened, I think Dad met Shenhua in 2003, and there were plans to hold an exhibition for him, but because Dad suddenly passed away unexpectedly, it never actually happened. So when I took over the gallery, I actually ended up working with him, and we did 3 solo exhibitions. So as I mentioned, we spoke to each artist, and I thought Shenhua's comment about this work was quite interesting. So he said, "This work is my undergraduate graduation artwork. Chongqing is a city famous for hot pot. People can be seen eating hot pot around the table everywhere. Eating is especially important in China, and in southern China in particular. A hot pot scene can best reflect Chinese eating culture. It is lively, prosperous, rich with food, an ever-expanding appetite, and even a bit of gluttony." I feel like it describes my appetite very well. He said, "I was deeply touched by these scenes, and I wanted to express this feeling when I graduated. When Mr. Manfred Schoeni came to the exhibition hall, I had already taken down the painting off the wall, and it was sitting in the exhibition hall waiting for a bangbang. A bangbang is a kind of migrant worker in Chongqing who carry things on poles. He said, it was raining really heavily that day, and the bangbang never came. So for me, it's like a story of fate. Mr. Schoeni braved the rain to come see the exhibition, to see the graduation show. And as the story goes, Dad then decided to collect the artwork and work with the artists. So it's, another example of Dad and his experiences touring around China. This was in Chongqing at the time. And then I wanted to quickly point out Haibo's work because I really like that.
Yeah, of course.
The photography. Again, it stands out really from the collection because most of Dad's artworks are on canvas, but this is photography by Haibo, and it comes from a series called They, which he did in the 1990s and 2000s. And what he did was he found old photographs of family and friends during the Cultural Revolution. So the artworks on the left, the artworks on the top. And then what he did was he tried to find the same people to recreate the pose many years later. So the 2 photos side by side, it sort of shows a physical, trace of time, and also the absence, obviously, of friends and family. So like the one on the left, you see, this is probably a class photo. And at the bottom, he retraced and refound all those people. And the 4 seats that are missing are obviously people who passed away. And the one on the right is actually, so the photo on the right, the portrait on the left is the artist himself and his friend. But I just really love this series because I just think it's so interesting to see sort of the change of time and finding the old photos and finding the people again. So anyway, so shall we pop into the next room?
Yeah, sure. Yep. Next group. Right. So this group is, obviously you can see it's whimsical, I call it, and also very, it's basically, well, in an English term, I guess, it's kind of like take a mickey out of, thing that, whatever they were experiencing. But I think like a lot of them, like you can see Qu Jilong, you can see Yu Mingjun and Yan Xiaobing, some of those are very recognizable faces now in Chinese contemporary art. At the time, in the 90s, they just graduated from art school. So we and your dad at that time, you know, for example, with Yu Minjun and Yang Xiaobing, they just fresh grad basically, and your dad basically selected them and then say, let's do a show. And I remember all these paintings come in, and I remember laughing my head off looking at Yu Minjun's work, because some of them are so funny and crazy, and they are, and some of them are absolutely enormous in size, and you're talking about like 2 meters by 2 meters work. And he's got a great sense of humor, and then, you know, even today he still uses his own, you know, all these the depiction of himself, you know, he's making a joke of himself. Yeah, exactly. So his self-portraits,
Except
you know,
I think now he has no hair. Sorry.
that's right. And then Yang Xiaobing lost his mullet as well. That struck me. So Yu Minjun was very much at that time. We knew he would be. Funny enough, we know he would actually make it because of his sense of humor, I guess.
Yeah.
How
He also has a very distinctive style, right? So if you see his work, you immediately can associate it with him. And I think so. Him, Yu Minjun, Yang Xiaobing, and quite a few artists were actually based in the Yuemingyuan village. And Dad had come across these studios, and that's how he discovered them. But really, his first introduction into China was through an antique business he had, and because he loved art, he was then taken to all these artist studios, met the artists, and then decided to open the gallery.
Yeah, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that he picked Yu Minjun, because your dad is so he's also full of sense of humor. So, you know, that's
and color. He loved color.
yeah, exactly. The vibrant color, same with Yu Minjun, Yang Xiaobing, sorry. And you know, he just picked it up. It's kind of like a universal language between them.
Yeah.
You know,
and Chi Long, you can see his sort of pop art reference as well, right? And there's sort of a bit of an Andy Warhol reference, and the duplicates of the Mao, and consumerism, and how women's sort of position started to change, and the influence of the West.
But when you look at it today, I think people will have different opinion. At the time, but at the time it was very much experimenting with Western ideas, and you know, it's very clear that they use a lot of icons, like, you know, very much like Andy Warhol. They use Mao Zedong as an icon, and then incorporate it and trying to juxtapose with, you know, consumerism. You know, trying to, I guess, you know, trying to make him as a bit like Campbell's soup, like Andy Warhol's, I guess. Commercializing him, fulfilling the open door policy, I guess.
I think something else quite interesting is the repetition. You look at Chen Yu on the Chen Yu, how it's like multiples and repetitive of the same character, and it's sort of this idea of seeking for one's identity as things started to change so quickly and rapidly. And you know, with Chen Yu in particular, he always depicted the same character, but one of them is different, and sort of questioning like what sets one apart from all the others. There's also Zhang Linhai above the fireplace. He also did a lot of repetition in his artworks. And then further to the left in the other room is Panda Hein. That's another really good example of that too.
Yeah, it's almost very subtle, but at the same time, I don't know, it's very clever in a way, and that contrast, you know, being, you know, it's in your face, but at the same time, the message is very subtle, and you know, it really leaves you to the imagination, how you want to interpret it. You know, they're not saying anything, kind of, I guess, challenging the status quo, or what have you, but definitely.
Gong does challenge the status quo.
Some of them do, but but some of them not. Some of them are. So it depends on how artists interpret the, you know, the ideas. And do you want to go to the what was it? The left. Do you want to talk about Fang Linjun, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the artists, I think, in Yuemingyuan village, and again, he uses his own portrait in a lot of his artworks. And, you know, this is sort of like it's a joyous depiction, but I think there's always an underlining uncertainty in a lot of the artworks. And then you see Yaman Jin again on the left, you know, it's him, it's like a forced laugh. Again, like what's behind the actual, you know, expression that they're showing. Why don't we move upstairs?
Yep.
So the third floor, making invisible visible, art and politics.
Yes, the politics one. Yep.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Okay. Yep. So this one is the smallest one out of the 8 themes. But they are equally interesting. As you can see on the left, we got Liu Daihong depiction of Hong Kong Central, and it was this particular piece, The Story of Central, was exhibited at Art Asia. I don't think it was actually ever exhibited. I'm trying to remember whether it actually exhibited in the gallery, but it was quite a crowd.
It was exhibited at Art Fair. I don't think it was exhibited. During Gag's time.
It was definitely at the art fair, because I remember there were some politician came in and have a look at it. So I do remember that. And so it is an interesting piece. You know, it's a triptych, and you can see on the left hand side, you know, the before, you know, the long time ago, what Hong Kong looked like in Central. And then you got in the middle, where's the celebrating the handover in 1997, and then on the left, I'll leave it to your imagination. And but it is the artist called this historical variety show. So, and he used a lot of symbolism again, and really trying to you know, build a narratives about Hong Kong and how he sees it at the time. And it's almost like I have to congratulate him being very, very accurate, actually. His depiction, and who would know at the time in early 90s, and we wouldn't have imagined the outcome.
What I do love about his work is there's so many little details in it, and like you said, depicting narrative and little stories.
Yes.
So I do recommend participants, when you get a chance, to go into SPXR and really have a look at the closer details.
Exactly.
And
very, very detailed work. And then so also in this collection we've got obviously when I look at it, you know, there are only 4 pieces of works. So the 2 of them actually talk about Hong Kong at the time, and you know, I will leave it to your imagination, the political undertones at the time. It's quite very obvious. And then we've got 2 other work, one by Liu Wei and then Jin Fanzi, both depiction of Mao Zedong. So the first one is on the left is Liu Wei, which is called The Last Supper on the left. So it is sort of almost a direct reference to the Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, but obviously replace it with the political leaders of the day at the time, and it's you know, again he's using Western ideas, but then replace them with obviously with Chinese subjects, and so that's one episode. And then the other one by Jin Fanzi, I think I read it somewhere. He you know, he goes through different phases at that time. The early phases he was more of a social commentator, but this time when he did the depiction of Mao Zedong, it's pretty much, you feel like I think at the time it was very much, the environment at the time was much more stable, and he think, you know, sort of all the dust settled down pretty much, and that's how he sees it at the time, and that's why he did this particular piece.
Quite a relaxing scene, isn't it?
Expressing that view at the time. So so it's you know, it's up to how the audience interpret it, but for me the undertones is very obvious, and it reflecting, you know, what was going on at the time in Hong Kong and in China. But your dad is definitely he wasn't thinking about being a political voice, that's for sure.
No,
he
never really had a strong political stance. It was more about giving the artists an opportunity, really, right, to express themselves.
That's right.
Yeah.
So art is always, you know, They always
Let's
depict.
go into the other room. I love these works too. And I feel like, I mean, I can't really say obviously because Dad's not here anymore, but I do feel like he had a personal attachment to realism artists.
Yes,
And the beauty that they depicted. Do you want to talk a bit about these artists?
Yeah, well, I want to talk very quickly about, why at the time, as people who study Chinese contemporary art, during the Mao Zedong period, obviously realism was a sort of a popular choice of the day. And so for this group of painter, for this collection of works, it is actually, it is not about that at all. It is about going back, about restoration of basic values. It's about aesthetics. It's about, it's not about those political baggage at all. So, and where they actually have, at that time in the 90s is when artists were allowed to go overseas and do a field trip and study Western arts, and they all come back, and then they, they're learning the technique from the European masters, and then they come back and then they develop their own signature. So this group of work pretty much like that. Yeah, basically pretty much about that. They learn the techniques, and then they make their own mark by obviously creating works that they feel that express what they saw at the time. For example, like Li Guijun. This is Li Guijun.
On the left.
On the left, sorry. So on the left, Li Guijun, he your dad signed him up probably in the 95, I think, 94, 95.
Yeah, I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah, and he's a little bit different from Wang Yidong, because Wang Yidong is another, he's superb, basically. He's absolutely amazing. Different style, but he does a lot of young portraiture of young women, and it's they are very, when you look at it, the detail is extraordinary and very realistic. It's some sort of a romanticism going on. You can feel it, and I think he was one of the one or two. Your dad didn't. He did sign up a few artists, realist artists, but him, Li Guijun and Wang Yidong were his favorites, definitely.
Yeah. I do think they were his favorites.
Yeah, Zhang Li is probably another one, but
yeah,
he collected and that
Li
many.
Guijun in particular, I think we could talk about it a bit later, but I do feel like they had a very strong relationship. And in fact, the painting on the left, I find it particularly personal because Dad was a great lover of wine. And, Dad not only supported these artists as a patron, but he also, if you like, introduced them to sort of Western joie de vivre, including drinking wine, smoking cigars. We have photo references later. But, Li Guijun was one artist in particular, even though Dad didn't speak Chinese, Li Guijun he spoke a bit of English, but really not much. They had a sort of understanding between each other and appreciation. And, so Li Guijun really learned and appreciated wine through spending time with Dad. And this painting was actually up at my dad's home when he passed away. So I think there was a personal attachment to that. Yeah. But I think this is now maybe a good chance to pop into the other room. And I can talk, or unless you have anything else you want to say.
No, I'm happy for you to pop into the other room. So Family in Love, this is so when I curated this part of the exhibition, I thought, it's really, it jumps at me, his love for his family, how he groomed Nicole when she was 12.
Yeah, get ready for the gallery business.
That's right. But he would completely trust her and let her to obviously to experiment. But in the process of that, he also get artists to paint family portraits, and especially you're the favorites. And so you can see this in this collection here. There's many portraits of Nicole by different artists, and
Yeah.
obviously Qi Jilong, Wang Daxian, who else? Go turn around maybe.
Zhang Shaogang. So this I find most awkward actually about this room, because obviously there's a lot of my portraits. We can maybe start with Qi Jilong behind you, Angel. That was actually a portrait. If you click onto it, I think you can see photos that my dad had presented to Qi Jilong. So Qi Jilong he was the one who did downstairs the pop art, the girl in bikini with Mao, but he was also known for doing revolutionary girls. So dad had actually sent these photos to the artist at the time. And when I first took over the business, he had 6 of them up in his office. And the first thing I did was take them down, just because I found them rather odd to stare at myself. But now that I'm older, I kind of appreciate it a bit more. Then there's also the portrait by Zhang Shaogang, which is really, I think, in itself extremely unique, because Zhang Shaogang himself said, you know, that he rarely paints people that he knows or real people that he's met, let alone a Westerner. Can you zoom in onto the portrait, Angel? And he said that, do I have a quote from him? I don't have a quote, but I remember him saying something along the lines of, I don't know how he convinced me to do this painting, but obviously he was very he was very convincing, because here we are with this portrait. So I feel very privileged to have a portrait by Zhang Shaogang. And I think the other artworks in this room also tell lovely stories about the relationship between dad and the artists. Maybe let's start with a football bet, and we'll go around the room. Yeah, so the football bet was, well, I found it interesting because this is by an artist called Zhong Biao, and he had actually called the artwork Forgotten. This is through research for this project, but dad ended up labeling this as the football bet, and I think maybe Zhong Biao didn't want to remember it as being about the bet, or so. I have a quote from the artist in 2007. He said, one evening in 1996. In Chongqing, Manfred was having dinner with some artists at the Sichuan Fine Art Academy. During dinner, Manfred and I placed a bet on the championship of the European Soccer League. My father loved soccer. Whoever lost this bet would need to paint a painting and gift it to the other. The match was Germany against Italy, and the result was 3-1 in Germany's favor. Manfred, whose mother tongue was German, won the bet. It wasn't until 1999 that I worked on finishing the artwork that I had to paint for my loss. It is entitled Forgotten. It contains a scene with Manfred, he's the one behind the desk, and someone playing a football, a hint about that evening. We can vaguely sense from afar the passion of that evening as it tells us the story of memory and forgetting. So I love that, you know, there's dad is captured here, and it's got the sort of story behind it. And you know, it took place over dinner, as dad would always do. He'd invite the artists over dinner, they would eat, they would drink. So I think that's a lovely story. Then the one on the left is another portrait of dad.
Yep.
Yeah, I wonder if the participants can guess which one, but I will tell you, it's Xia Xing. So before we're talking about his sort of cheeky and sensual, you know, characteristics of his artwork, and this is exactly it. So one of dad, you know, dad was a Swiss entrepreneur. He had several businesses, including a vineyard. And this artwork is a reflection on his vineyard, as well as his love of wine. So, you know, dad's got purple nails, he's got wine stained lips, very hairy, like a Westerner, if you like a monkey. And depicted really feminine, which I would never sort of associate my dad with. So I find that's Xia Xing's way of teasing him, if you like.
You really rocked the boat.
He did. Then there's the other painting by Li Guijin, the Unsi one, which is behind us on the left. So this is the artist who had painted the girl holding the wine glass. So this artwork is another lovely example, again, of the relationship. So dad had actually invited Li Guijin to his house in France, Annecy, which is actually where I am now. Funny. So dad had invited Li Guijin, and they spent, I think, 2 or 3 weeks there together. So imagine an artist who doesn't speak English, and dad, who didn't speak Chinese, they spent 3 weeks together, drinking wine, cooking food, painting. And this is a landscape of the house. And in the distance, you can see dad watering the garden. And I just love that sort of the sort of feelings that you can sense from it. It captures the simple pleasures, right, and fond memories that they had, as well as for myself, the time I spent there. And Li Guijin in 2003, that was when he was there, he said, "It was the best vacation of my life. Good food, beautiful scenery, 1 bottle of wine in the afternoon and 2 bottles of red wine in the evening." He went on to say, "Manfred basically didn't know any Chinese. I only understood a few sentences in English, but we had no problem eating, drinking, shopping, and communicating. It seems that Manfred's intuition was savvy, and he was as good as any artist. He's the most energetic and funny person I know, and he's even had a huge influence on my character." And I often wonder whether it's to do with dad's background, because dad came from a very humble background. So really everything he built he was a self-made man. And because he was a self-taught artist and he loved to paint, I think he had a certain connection. Sorry, this is not Li Guijin's quote anymore. I think he had a certain connection with the artists that was quite unique and really set him apart from others. So talking about his infectious sort of joie de vivre, can we look at the Ashanti painting? So this artwork, Wang Guangyi is the artist, and he's known for his political pop, consumerism, and combining all those elements. So dad had specially commissioned this for his Spanish restaurant, which he had in Beijing, called Ashanti. It was in Sanlitun between 1998 and 2003. And really, at the time, again, it was pioneering, because there weren't many Western restaurants, let alone restaurants that showed artworks. And it really became a hub for people, artists, art lovers to meet. And I was there myself during my gap year many, many moons ago, and I witnessed how it really was one of its kind. There's Yeomin Jin in the space, other artists. On the top, there's Liu Wei. In the middle, Zhang Xiaogang. On the bottom, Yeomin Jin. Then here, I love this photo because I think it's the epitome of what it was. All the artists are smoking cigars, and I can tell you that influence came from my father. You've got Li Xianting, who's a very famous art critic, on the left. Right. You've got the artist Liu Wei. Then you've also, on the right, you've got Yeomin Jin in the forefront. You've got Wang Guangyi, the artist who painted the painting. So, it really became, Chi Zhilong said himself, his bar in Sanlitun, where artists gathered, once became a popular center of Beijing's contemporary art scene. So it's almost like a salon style. There's Chi Zhilong there. And see my painting. There's dad entertaining his guests. Artworks are up on the wall. Curator Huang Du, he said, his restaurant and gallery helped develop the artistic environment. As Beijing lacked spaces for artists to gather and places for showcasing their work, many artists gathered at the restaurant after it opened, and going to Ashanti for dating and chatting became fashionable for artists in Beijing. The regular visitors included Zhongfanzhi, Wang Guangyi, and Zhang Xiaogang, who relished red wine from Mr. Schoeni's winery in South Africa, tobacco, and Spanish food. The Ashanti restaurant served as a congregation space, and many stories about art and artists have entered into local lore. So I think, really dad's contribution was multifaceted. It wasn't just the gallery. It wasn't just the promotion they did through that. It wasn't the influence he had on Western curators to do, museum shows overseas. The restaurant also played a really vital role. Yeah. So I think, just checking on the time, shall we run down to the basement?
Yeah.
I say we. Angel, who's assistant curator, you're doing a great job of sort of navigating around SPXR.
That's right.
So while you run down, the next space we're going to look at is in the basement, and it's the 8+8.
Yep.
So Martha, I think you were there when the idea was conceived. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Okay, so 8+8 was conceived by a dad. It was basically one day, a hot day. It was a summer day in Hong Kong, very humid. And he and I just have normal chats, and he sort of say, "Oh, what am I going to do with this big painting?" And then, it's really hard to, promote them. And then he's sort of thinking, and then it will be really easy to pack them up and ship them for exhibitions. If there's a museum show, it'll be really easy to deal with it because it is smaller. So that's how the idea came about. And it was really coming from his frustration, really, how to, because, if you run a gallery and what it's like when you pack a big painting and the challenges of that, the logistic. It's not easy. When you pack it, you have to.
It wasn't just logistic, but it was also commercially minded, right? In terms of
yes, that's right.
selling large works.
I try to be polite about that.
No, let's be frank.
Another way to look at it is obviously, when you have big painting, it's harder to sell. But when you have them smaller, but also make it more accessible to the public, and at a much more affordable prices, that is attractive. And so he came up with this idea, and but to me it was at the time I thought he just say, "Oh, how about I give each artist a bunch of canvases, small canvases, and let them do basically faces, but whatever way they want to interpret it, it's up to them." And so that was the framework. And so he went ahead and do that. And how many did he end up commissioning? Over
we calculated there were 725 small panels. So, and it really became a milestone exhibition. But I think, a second ago I said it was commercially minded, but the reality was when he held the exhibition, it wasn't as financially successful as he had hoped. In fact, I remember Zhang Xiaogang, the ones we're looking at now, Dad had given them away or donated them as a way to try promote them further. But it was a great selection of artists too, because I think it gave a good rounded example of a lot of the contemporary avant-garde artists at the time. And it reflects the artist's beliefs and prejudices, the economic and political undercurrents, future aspirations, and influences from the past. And I remember Johnson Chang from Henna. We've mentioned him a few times because he was a pioneer, really. He himself said, such a brilliant idea, and I wish I'd come up with it. And I think now, of course, it's become recognized. It's a milestone. You will see a lot of these artworks coming up into auction, but really at the time, it wasn't as commercially successful, but it was an interesting, I think, curatorially in terms of this concept, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and can you imagine commissioning all these artists, pay them up front, just that side of it, the financial commitment of that. It's incredible. I don't think, if you even look at museums, they can commission artworks, but not like 700.
725 to be exact. So here we have Xin Haizhou on the left. The black and white opera series is Zhang Bin.
Yes.
And you got Zhang Gong.
And then
to the right, you got Yang Xiaobin.
Yeah, all the big names. Martha Liew. Yeah.
And then we got Liu Wei, Zhang Xiaogang.
Yep.
Zhang Xiaogang.
And then
Wang Jisong, policy, love. Then of course Zhang Banzhi. And then Guo Jin. So there's actually 4 artists we don't have in our collection, which is Liu Xiaodong, Qi Zhilong, Wang Guangyi, and Yuan Menjin. All right. Well, should we
go to the next one? Okay, this one come up because I at the time actually I'll tell you a little bit of the story. Originally I actually had 7 themes. I didn't have 8. And then my friend said to me, come on, make it 8. Make it lucky number.
Lucky number 8.
Yeah.
Like the 8 plus 8 minus 1.
That's right. And then I thought, oh, how am I going to think about number 8? What am I going to put in? And then just for I had a clarity, like, moment of realization. It was like, why can't we just exhibit something that we don't think is that successful? You know, just to give a bit of I guess an interesting point of view. You know, how eccentric your dad was. You know,
Yeah, I like how you put it, that it's really the eccentric side, and
Yeah.
that it's true. And, you know, not, of course, not all artists that he represented at the gallery or collected were commercially successful, right?
Correct.
Like any entrepreneur, you take risk, and there's some, you know, artists who made it and some who didn't. But, you know, he clearly believed in them.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, the point is actually it's about presenting the full spectrum of his collection. I don't want to sort of hide anything, because, you know, we're here to show them what he actually made of, you know, not just the commercially successful one, but also like he took risks, and, you know, some of them could be complete, you know, not so successful. And, you know, he definitely did one, as far as I know, Russian artist Alexei Shundukov, which did not sell an artwork, which he actually bought over 30 pieces of works, and he only sold one piece of work out of their collection. And I don't know what happened to the rest of them now.
I still have them.
You still have them. Okay. And he did a wonderful book, you know, like it was very high standard, and he believed in artists, but it wasn't successfully commercial. So this collection, this particular group, is all about that, how, you know, sometimes he took those huge risks and trying to, you know, push the boundary, basically, you know. And it's this is, and you look at it and you kind of scratch your head, why do you pick that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Liu Fei, that was from exhibition Bold and Trendy, and I think the artist sort of expressed at the time the popular trend for women, the bold women, for women to sort of strike out, you know, into new life of freedom and modern ideas. Then you have Chen Wenbo, the Pink Lady. In fact, this painting was me saying to my father, I love this painting, I love this artist, please, can you collect it? And Chen Wenbo is very much about, again, materialism and that sort of change in society, and expressing yourself. And, you know, so it's very like bright colors. This is a vitamin series, which is quite important in the artist's, his artworks. And then you have Li Hong on the left, which was from an artwork, you know, I think it's a good demonstration because he also supported female artists. You know, he did, in 1999, he did an exhibition called Sense and Sensibility, which included 5 female artists, Chen Xi, Cui Xiuwen, Feng Jiali, Li Hong, this painting here, and Yuan Yaomin. So, you know, he had worked with other female artists as well. And I think it's important that this piece is in the collection. And yeah, and then there's the Lulin, which is behind us. That is a very odd artwork, to be honest. I find it very unlike him.
Yeah, it's got teeth.
And although he liked bold, he liked colors. But this was actually a museum piece, which was held in a museum show called China, which took place in Germany, in Bonn, and later in Austria. So anyway, I think we've given quite a good, rounded, quick tour of the collection. I want to open up, if that's okay with you, to the participants, if there's any Q&A. And so please, you can basically type in the chat if you've got any Q&A questions. Don't be shy. I know sometimes this stage of a tour kind of goes quiet, although we're not physically in a room together. While you have a think about questions, this is actually a timeline which we also created, which demonstrates the different milestone exhibitions that took place at Schoeni Art Gallery. And it spans from 1994 to 2004 when Dad passed away. If there are no questions, I just wanted to mention that we had a talk previously with Johnson Chang from Han Art Gallery and Karen Smith, who's a very renowned art critic, Chinese art critic, and we'll be posting it up online soon if you want to watch it. Also, if you have the time now, we can also jump all sort of after this webinar, we can jump into SPXR, the actual, you can jump into this exhibition space for yourself. Me, Angel, and Jay, head of digital, and Martha, we can meet you there. There you go. So in the chat box, I don't know if you can see it. Actually, Angel, is there a way to unmute people if there's anything they want to say?
Oh, there's one person say amazing stuff with your collection, travel around the world.
Well, to be honest, I wanted to do Dad's collection properly and have it literally travel around the world. But of course, you know, nowadays with the pandemic and COVID, you have shipping is really expensive. You have the idea of insurance, logistics, everything. And that's why this concept of this virtual exhibition took place. So whoever asked that question to the others, if you look in the chat box, there's a link to spxr.space. On that page, actually, Angel, would you mind to quickly jump onto that page? You will see some sort of navigation explanations, but you can press enter, and then we will meet you in the space. We will teach you how to navigate around it, and then you can explore it for yourself. And if you have any questions, you can ask us there because we can talk to each other in the space. Yeah, is there any ending note you'd like to do, Martha, before we end the webinar?
No, I'm happy with your suggestions, and yeah, happy to jump into the SPXR. And we can all meet.
I see a question: where are the pictures hanging in reality? Sadly, they are mostly in storage. But the plan is to bring them and show them in my various homes. I'm in my dad's old office in Annecy, and you can see there's a Libre gin up there. So it's, yeah, they are sort of spread out at the moment. So I hope to see you at the SPXR space. It's really fun to navigate around and to talk and to catch up with everybody. So, Angel, is there anything else you'd like to say before we end the webinar?
Hi, I think also feel free to come to our website as well to check out more on our Schoeni Art Gallery website, because we already got a couple of researchers and students who their studies and research about Chinese contemporary art, and they start to give us a lot more comments on how to like digitally archive our website. So I would definitely highly recommend to go to the Schoeni Art Gallery.com, which not just the exhibition information you can find, but also there's a media tab here. You can read and watch all the podcasts and videos that Nicole has done before with the artist. So it's really interesting.
Thank you. And I see, Ty, you said with current tensions between China and I assume that's US rather than us. Have you seen a pickup in interest in this art? So I took over the gallery in 2004, and I would say I also experienced the boom in the Chinese contemporary art market. And then also, I wouldn't say bust, but I'd say sort of calming of that hype. And I don't actually, to answer your question, I haven't seen a pickup. But I think that's also to do with, you know, collectors have a lot of options, and Chinese contemporary art at the time was kind of exotic, wasn't it? And it was like a door into what the country was going through, and all the economical, social, political changes was reflected in artworks. And I think because of that, there was so much hype and interest in it, like especially, like I said, during 2008, that sort of gradual build up. So I don't think there has been a pickup in interest, but I also think the artists and the artworks have become much more international. It's not so China centric anymore. You know, it's not Chinese artists depicting about Chinese art. It's really depicting art on an international setting. But that's very much my opinion. I hope that answers your question, Ty. I can't hear you, sorry. So shall we meet in SPXR? I'm quite excited about seeing you there. Yeah. So I really encourage you all, please go to the website, spxr.space, press enter, and then find your way through. We'll meet you there and we'll help you